Yes, operator, I'm trying to reach Amalgamated Association of Morons, Local 6 and 7/8. Disbanded? Thank you. What knucklehead did that? So in our previous Stooges videos, we've talked about the 12 DVD box set that had a lot of those little themed titles, and we talked about some of the weird VHS releases that weren't part of the normal series of videos they released. I thought today, let's do another Stooges video, but let's do something that's different yet again. Let's look at the pre-Three Stooges time, at the Ted Healy and his Stooges era. For those who didn't know, in the early 30s, and even before that, the Stooges were paired with comedian Ted Healy. They were like his second bananas. That started on stage in the 19-teens and 20s, and then carried into film in 1930 with Soup to Nuts. So Ted Healy stars Moe, Leary, and Shemp as his Stooges, the very first Three Stooges film. This is a feature film, not a short. Notice Moe is credited as Harry. Maybe he was going to use that name in place of Moe, but opted to use Moe. His birth name, of course, was Moses. That'd probably make more sense. Soup to Nuts is a very strange kind of curio. It's mostly forgotten today, despite being the Stooges' kind of true, feature film comedy debut. It's a very goofy, early 30s kind of story. We have the juvenile leads, the male and female leads who have to fall in love, but they can't stand each other and other people oppose it and whatnot. And the Stooges and Ted Healy help them to fall in love. And Rube Goldberg wrote the film, and he has a little cameo appearance and stuff. I've only watched this a couple times. I don't really remember it that well. There are some gags that would carry over into the Stooges' later career, like their more famous short films and things like that. Interestingly, and the one thing I remember most vividly, the song "You'll Never Know Just What Tears Are" that the Stooges sing several times is done in this for the first time, and done in its entirety too, not just the little bit there. In addition to Ted and the Stooges, Freddie Sanborn, who was like a popular comic actor, vaudevillian actor, is teamed with the group as well, playing like a Harpo Marx kind of mute fireman character. The Stooges are firemen in this. And he joins them, and that's kind of interesting. And there are a couple actors in this, like Heine Conklin, who would carry on over into their short films as well. Fascinating from a historical standpoint, but kind of a forgettable, mostly uninteresting, simple comedy from the time. And the only feature film to feature Ted Healy and Shemp, interestingly enough. Shemp would be replaced by Curly for film very soon after. In fact, just a couple years later. This is probably what the Ted Healy era is most remembered for. They did 5 short films with Healy: Nursery Rhymes, Beer and Pretzels, Hello Pop, Plain Nuts, and The Big Idea. I talked a little bit about these before. You might remember in our VHS one, we talked about these cheapo VHS tapes that have some of the Ted Healy shorts on them mixed with other public domain or perceived to be public domain material. 3 of the Healy shorts, or I should say 3 of these shorts, are in color. Actually, one is not a Healy short. Nursery Rhymes, the first film to feature Moe, Leary, and Curly, teamed with Ted Healy, is in color. It has some gags you remember whenever the Stooges play children. If I gave you $1 and your father gave you $1, how many dollars would you have? $1. You don't know my father. Those kind of jokes all sort of originated here. Nursery Rhymes is in color, mostly so they could use some color musical numbers. They would steal musical numbers from other movies and reuse them here, or they would use outtakes, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But Nursery Rhymes, all told, isn't all that interesting, and some of the things like the Woman in the Shoe musical number go on, but a couple good gags there. Beer and Pretzels is probably the best of the Healy shorts, as it plays a lot like a Columbia short. The Stooges as waiters, that's where this cover image comes from. The Stooges as waiters, some of the gags would pop up again, do you serve pâté de foie gras? I'll see if the band can play it. That kind of thing. And different bits like that. I like that one a lot, and the Stooges participate in some of the musical numbers so they don't feel quite as tedious. My rule for 30s film comedies is if the comedians themselves are in the numbers, they're usually better than if it's just so-and-so famous opera singer and so-and-so famous dancer doing that stuff. Hello Pop is interesting in the sense that it was lost for many years. And here's actually an issue of Stooges Journal magazine. A print was rediscovered in Australia in 2013, so it took many, many decades. It hadn't been seen since the mid-1930s. It was thought, seen widely since the mid-1930s. It was thought every print was either lost or destroyed, but the Australian print was found and restored. Hello Pop has some good gags. Ted's trying to run a stage show and has to deal with the Stooges interrupting everything, and very temperamental musicians and whatnot. Got some funny bits there, like the Stooges climbing under the opera singer's dress and things like that, but nothing, you know, that's gonna really stick out. It is neat to see it, though. It was cool watching a Stooges short for the first time back in 2013 after I thought I'd seen everything. Plain Nuts is sort of an adaptation of the Stooges' stage routine. Ted Healy is trying to do a song or a monologue, and they keep coming on interrupting him, doing little gags. There's no real story to it, and it's not a particularly interesting watch in the sense that, you know, there's no plot, and then there's some random musical numbers thrown in. But as looking at what would the Stooges on stage have been like in the 30s, it's an invaluable document there. I should also mention that many of the Healy shorts team the Stooges and Ted with actress Bonnie Bunnell. She's kind of like a girl Stooge. She plays sort of a different part in each one. Sometimes she's paired off more with Healy and they have like a sort of romantic thing. Other times she's with the Stooges and they do the slapstick. It depends, but she's really good in Plain Nuts. One of the highlights, I think, of that one. And their 1934, the last Healy short, The Big Idea, which is a mostly dissonant connection, or collection I should say, of gags and songs and things like that, and the Stooges just keep barging into Ted's office and spraying him with water, and I don't know, that one, it feels like they'd kind of worn the whole thing thin by then. This also features another color film, that's what confused me earlier, Roast Beef in Movies, one of the few times that Curly does a solo film. They team him with George Gavot and Bobby Callahan as wannabe movie producers. It's pretty boring. Curly has a couple good bits, like where he eats goldfish, and there are jokes about the birth of a nation and the National Recovery Act and things like that, but nothing outstanding. Even Stooges fans generally don't find much of interest there. But this is the set to get. Classic Shorts from the Dream Factory, Volume 3, devoted solely to Howard Fine and Howard, as you see there. And in terms of, again, entertainment, not certainly as good as their Columbia films, but in terms of a historical look at how the Stooges actually started, invaluable. A must-have for any fan. Can't recommend it enough. Many of the Stooges solo shorts have also been released, like the Warner Archive, the made-on-demand label. They have put out like some of Shemp's solo films. I have one of the two volumes, need to get the other one. And even Sony has released like the other Columbia shorts that Shemp and Joe Besser and Curly Joe DeRita did by themselves, so that's pretty cool. The Stooges didn't do all their early films with Ted Healy. Here in 1933's Turn Back the Clock, they play kind of actually straight parts as singers at a wedding, and they sing some old, you know, early 1900 standards like Sweet Adeline and By the Light of the Silvery Moon, stuff like that. And then Lee Tracy, who has gone back in time after being in a car accident, he was hit by a car and woke up 20 years earlier, tries to ask them to sing what was then modern song, and makes a big fool of himself there. I actually really like Turn Back the Clock as a movie, and a lot of people compare it to It's a Wonderful Life and Back to the Future because it actually has some ideas that those films would use. So Lee Tracy, like I said before, wakes up 20 years younger, but with complete memory of what's happened in the meantime. He's able to predict World War II and the stock market crash and so on. And more importantly, he's able to get the girl that he loves, but he soon realizes that maybe he did better in the original timeline and not in this alternate time loop where he got to wake up and do his life over again. A lot of bitterness about World War I in this too, about how veterans were mistreated and forgotten about as soon as the war was over. If you watch a lot of early 30s films, Heroes for Sale, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, you can definitely feel just the vitriol that a lot of people felt about how our soldiers were treated when they got back from France and whatnot. So, very interesting in that regard. I like Turn Back the Clock a lot, and even if you're not a Stooges fan, I think you should definitely check it out. Back to the ones they did with Healy, we have here Dancing Lady. Dancing Lady is probably best remembered today for being Fred Astaire's film debut. He and Joan Crawford do a really fun dance number. Hi-ho, the gang's all here, / Let's Go Bavarian. As an avid beer drinker, I'm all about a song that's you know, all about Oktoberfest. They dance on a flying saucer too, which is also kind of strange. At its core, Dancing Lady is a very predictable early 30s melodrama. Clark Gable's the stage manager, but he's secretly in love with Joan Crawford the dancer, but a rich man, played by Franchot Tone, is trying to court her, and on and on. You can probably guess a lot of the plot points without even seeing the movie. But the Stooges get a couple good comedy bits in there, and Fred Astaire does a good dance with Joan Crawford and whatnot. Apparently, I don't know the veracity of this claim, but apparently there's a deleted scene involving Larry. He works on a jigsaw puzzle throughout the film, and apparently the payoff to that was it was to be a picture of Hitler. I don't know how true that is. Apparently that's not in the theatrical print. Maybe something that was trimmed out later. I don't know. It's an odd gag, because this was 1933, so Hitler would have literally just risen to power. But interesting stuff. And as a bonus on this DVD, they have Plain Nuts and Roast Beef and Movies, both ones that we saw on here. So one Stooges short and the solo Curly short. Some of the Healy shorts were released in that way. I know Beer and Pretzels was on the Flying Down to Rio DVD, the first Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie. Someday I'll have to talk about those, 'cause I love Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. So here's a set I bought many, many years ago when this was new. I think I was still in high school. And you get 2 Abbott and Costello films, 2 Laurel and Hardy films, and 2 Three Stooges films. One is the Shemp Western Gold Raiders. We'll talk about that another day when we talk about some of the later Stooges movies. But the other is Meet the Baron. You can see there Ted Healy and the Stooges on the cover. Radio actor Jack Pearl had a very profitable career playing Baron Munchausen on radio and making up all these exploits about animals he'd killed or places he'd been. And they teamed him with Jimmy Durante, and you know, these 2 explorers are mistaken for Baron Munchausen's assistant and asked to speak at a girls' college and whatnot. You know, I go back and forth on Meet the Baron. It has some very funny parts, but it also has some really poor effect shots that don't even try to look remotely convincing, and it has some really tedious routines that go on way too long. It's probably best remembered today, besides for the Stooges, of course, for its big musical number, Clean as a Whistle, with all the girls dancing in the huge round shower room of the college, that kind of thing. And they're maybe not nude, but they're certainly not too far away from it. So something that you wouldn't be able to get away with on film just a couple years after. And that clip, I know, has found its way into several documentaries and things on like pre-censorship Hollywood. But Meet the Baron, I guess if you like Jimmy Durante, you might get something out of this one, but for the most part, it's, you know, kind of a pedestrian comedy. And someday we'll talk about the Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello releases in this box. There are some Ted Healy and his Stooges films that have yet to be made widely available on home media in any form. 1933's Merton Marge and 1934's Fugitive Lovers, both being good examples. But let's wrap up today's look with one of the last Ted Healy and his Stooges films, Hollywood Party. Hollywood Party is a terrible movie. Jimmy Durante and Jack Pearl teamed up again, but it underwent a lot of production issues with people being cast and fired and changing directors and writers and so on, and we're left with just kind of a mess. This vague plot about Jimmy Durante has Schnarzan the Mighty needing to hire lions for his show, so he hosts a big party to invite all these backers and whatnot, and that really has nothing to do with the film as a whole. This is the only film that Laurel and Hardy and the Three Stooges both appear in, but they don't share any scenes. Laurel and Hardy get a really good bit as the lion delivery men, fighting with Lupe Velez, throwing eggs at her and things like that. They would redo that in, I think, The Bullfighters, but it's better here. They have really good chemistry with Lupe Velez. I wish they'd done more films together. But the Stooges have a little bit as autograph hounds and 3 anthropologists try to determine where on the evolutionary ladder the Stooges fall. You know, are they Neanderthals or something else? And it's kind of a funny bit, and Ted appears briefly to slap them all and whatnot, and it's alright. And there's a Mickey Mouse cartoon that's in color, and a few other little frills like that. Not a good film. I guess if you're looking for some ridiculous, kind of brainless fun from the early 30s, you know, you could do a lot worse than this, but certainly not mandatory watching. And you can find that clip of the Stooges both online and also in documentaries. I know MGM's Big Parade of Comedy has it. So this I know was released on VHS. This Warner Archive, of course, came later, but I know this one was at least reasonably available for a time. And then in 1934, of course, the split between Ted Healy and the Stooges was finalized. Stooges went to Columbia, and they made the short Woman Haters, which started their almost 25-year career working for them in the short subject department. And Ted Healy continued to bounce around, pop up in a lot of different movies. He was in Mad Love with Peter Lorre and San Francisco with Clark Gable, so all kinds of different things. So that was our look at Ted Healy and the Stooges. If you know anything about early Stooges films, or you have a favorite of their early work, please do comment below. Looking forward to seeing you again. Until then, spread out.